The movie begins with a notorious criminal named Frank Morris, who is being sent to Alcatraz, a high-security prison located on an island in the middle of the ocean. No inmate had ever escaped from Alcatraz until now. Frank, however, was infamous for breaking out of jails, having fled several before. But escaping Alcatraz, no prisoner had even dared to dream of it. When Frank arrived, he was thoroughly searched before being locked in his cell, where he was expected to spend the rest of his life. The next morning, during breakfast, he met an elderly inmate named Litmus, who kept a rat as a pet. As Frank chatted with Litmus, he noticed another prisoner, Wolf, openly taunting him. Frank ignored Wolf and continued his conversation. Later, Frank was summoned to the warden's office for a briefing. The warden warned him sternly, "Don't even think about escaping. Countless prisoners have tried and failed here." But while the warden ranted, Frank stealthily stole a nail clipper from his desk, a tiny tool that could prove invaluable in a place like Alcatraz. Back in his cell, he hid it inside his Bible. During a group shower, Wolf approached Frank again, provoking him. This time, Frank snapped. He grabbed Wolf and beat him fiercely, earning a fearsome reputation that kept others from messing with him. Frank soon found solace in the prison library, where he befriended the librarian English, a lifer who'd given up on freedom and buried himself in books. Both men shared a love for history, forging a strong bond. Around the same time, Frank met Doc, a talented artist who spent his days painting. Doc believed the harsh reality of Alcatraz could drive anyone mad, but his art kept him sane. One day, a guard told Frank about a carpentry job that paid 15 cents an hour, but trouble loomed. When inmates were outside their cells, Wolf returned with a weapon. He lunged at Frank, but Doc warned him just in time. Frank used his jacket to block the attack, sparking a brawl. Guards intervened, but Wolf attacked them too. Both men were thrown into solitary confinement, a dreaded windowless cell where prisoners were left to rot. Frank seethed at the injustice. After 2 weeks in solitary, Frank was released. Litmus welcomed him back with a note delivered by his pet rat. Frank also bonded with his neighbor Charlie, a convict serving time for a major theft. Charlie regretted his past mistakes, which had worsened his crimes. The next day, the warden made an unannounced tour of the cells. He spotted a prisoner's sketch of him, a portrait that initially pleased him, before ordering all of Doc's paintings removed. The decision crushed Doc, who lived for his art. Frank tried to console him. "Forget the paintings, man. We've gotta survive here." But Doc was broken. One day during a shift, Doc severed 3 of his fingers, a defiant act against the warden. Guards rushed to call doctors, while Frank watched silently. That night, alone in his cell, Frank noticed a cockroach crawling out of a vent. Staring at it, he realized the vent might lead to freedom. That's when English told Frank the real reason the warden had all of Doc's paintings removed. He'd hated the portrait Doc had drawn of him. Later, during mealtime, Frank met 2 brothers, John and Clarence, who recognized him from a past jail stint. They started talking about Alcatraz, agreeing that escaping was impossible because the prison was surrounded by water. But their conversation planted a seed in Frank's mind. He wanted to make history. He wanted to be the first to escape. That night, Frank began chipping away at the cement around his cell's grill, using the stolen nail clipper. Whenever guards approached, he'd hide the tool in his Bible and pretend to read. Over time, his efforts paid off. The cement around the grill started weakening. Meanwhile, during visitation, English struggled to connect with his daughter, who'd grown up without him, leaving him heartbroken. Charlie, reuniting with his wife, learned his elderly mother was dying with only months left. This news fueled Charlie's desperation to escape. The next morning, Frank shared his escape plan with John and Charlie. He explained that years of salt water and wind had weakened the prison's structure. By chipping away the cement, they could remove the ventilation grills, crawl through the pipes, and flee. But one problem remained: how to cross the ocean. Frank had a solution. Clarence worked in the prison's laundry department and could smuggle raincoats and rubber cement. Frank knew how to build a lifeboat and jackets. "Trust me on this," he said. The group agreed to work together. That night, Frank chipped at the cement while Charlie kept watch. But the nail clipper was slow and dull, leaving Frank's hands bruised. The next day, he told the others they needed a sharper tool. Spotting his spoon, Frank scuffed it on his shoe, then complained to a guard about the dirty utensil. The others backed him up, and the guard agreed to replace it. When they went to the front desk, John distracted the guard, while Frank pocketed an extra spoon. Still, it wasn't enough. Frank traded 20 days' worth of sweets to Litmus for supplies. He melted the spoon, combined it with a nail clipper and a coin, and crafted a stronger tool. One night as Frank worked, a guard approached unnoticed. Luckily, English distracted the guard, allowing Charlie to bang on the cell bars, alerting Frank to hide the tools. They'd narrowly escaped detection, but Frank realized he couldn't fully rely on Charlie. Days later, Frank discovered screws behind the grills. He'd need another tool. During carpentry shifts, he secretly crafted a small, improvised device. To sneak the tool out of the shop, Frank had to bypass the metal detector. He grabbed a rusty scrap of metal and hid it in his hand. When the alarm blared, he handed the rusty piece to the guard, while the real tool stayed tucked in his shoes. Back in his cell, he used it to pry open the grill, revealing a maze of pipes that might lead to freedom. But Frank knew they needed a better plan, like fake heads to trick the guards. They sprang into action. John collected hair from the nail shop, Charlie sourced paint, and Frank, with English's help, gathered newspapers. Frank molded the papers and cement into human skulls, adding hair and paint to make them look real. Charlie crafted fake grills to cover their tracks. One night, Frank tested the setup alone, using the fake head and grill. But when he reached a metal door in the pipeline, he couldn't open it alone. A guard patrolling nearby grew suspicious, but eventually moved on. They'd barely escaped. The next morning, Frank and Charlie discussed the close call. John and Clarence had finished their own fake heads, so they pressed forward. That night, John and Charlie returned to the door. Together, they realized they needed better tools to cut through it. During a music class, Charlie spotted an old fan. He traded his snacks with litmus to smuggle it out in an instrument box. Frank turned the fan into a cutting tool. They returned to the door, slicing through it while guards ignored the noise. Finally, they set their escape for Tuesday night. But at breakfast, Frank placed a flower on the table in Doc's memory. The warden crushed it, furious. Litmus, enraged, lunged at the warden, but collapsed from a heart attack. The warden searched Frank's cell, found nothing, and out of spite, ordered Frank and Charlie moved. Meanwhile, Wolf, back from solitary, prepared to attack Frank again. English intervened, stopping him. That night, Frank, John, and Clarence met in the pipeline. Charlie panicked last minute and backed out, watching his chance at freedom slip away. The others reached the roof, dodged searchlights, and scaled the wall. On the other side, Charlie finally mustered courage, racing to the pipeline. But alone, he couldn't open the door. Frank, John, and Clarence had already vanished into the night, leaving Alcatraz behind. The three inmates now crossed a road and reached the shore. They knew exactly what to do, and worked quickly and calmly. They began inflating the raft by mouth, a grueling task, but desperation drove them. Finally, they pushed the raft into the ocean and vanished into the darkness, leaving Alcatraz behind forever. The next morning, guards on rounds initially saw nothing unusual. But when they pulled back Frank's blanket, their blood ran cold. Instead of Frank, they found the fake head tucked under the sheets. Alarms blared as the truth spread. 3 prisoners had escaped. A massive search launched. Boats, helicopters, and teams scoured the waters. But no bodies washed ashore. Rumors swirled. Had they drowned or made it? Privately, the warden suspected they'd survived. Yet, to protect Alcatraz's reputation, he declared them dead. Few believed it. Frank became a legend, his name whispered, as the genius who broke out of the inescapable prison. A year-long covert search turned up nothing. No bodies, no trace, just the haunting possibility that they'd beaten the odds. And so the story endures, a mix of cunning, luck, and the unshakable human will to be free. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more.